All right, let's take a look at another word problem related to time, distance, and rate. Somebody please again read this question, and I set them up again. Go ahead.
Tom Quick traveled 260 miles east of St. Louis. For most of the trip, he averaged 71 miles per hour, but for one period of time, he was slowed to 20 miles per hour due to a major accident. If the total time of travel was 8 hours, how many miles did he drive at the reduced speed?
Thank you. So in this case, there are two different rates that we're going. The first, remember again the formula, the distance is equal to rate times time. So for some part of the trip, the rate, we're going to call it R1 times T1. And for the other part of the trip, the rate changes. We're going to call it R2 times T2. And that would be the distance that we covers here, D1 and D2. And this total distance should add up to 260. So let's identify what R1, R2, T1, and T2 is. So can somebody tell me what would be R1? The rate that we travel most of the time in this trip, or some of the time in this trip.
70 miles per hour.
70, very good. So R1 is given to us as 70, but the time T1 is given to us. Let's call it, for some time we go this. Now, what is R2? Do we know
20.
the rate? What's that?
20 miles per hour.
Yeah, 20. So for other part, we're going 20 miles. And then this would be T2. This should add up to 260. So we can start with this. Do we know any relationship for the time? Do we know T1 plus T2? What is T1 plus T2?
8 hours.
8 hours, that's given to us. So we know we have some relationship between these two. So I can say T1 is 8 minus T2, right? If I subtract T2 from both sides. And then plug it into this equation. I have 70 T1. For everywhere I see T2, well, let's erase that part. Do it right. 70 times T1, we already solved that. We just says 8 minus T2. I'm writing everything in terms of one variable so I can solve for them. So if I solve this equation, I would get the time that we traveled 20 miles per hour. Does that make sense? And that's easy to calculate here. We distribute 70 times 8, that give me 560 minus 70 times T2 plus 20 times T2 equal to 260. And here we have 70 T2 minus 20 T2. They give me minus 50 T2. Don't forget, be careful with the sign here. And if I add, use different color here. If I subtract 560 to both sides of this equation, then on the right-hand side I would get 260 minus 560. So I get minus 50 T2 is equal to minus 300. So now I can solve for T2 will be minus 300 divided by minus 50. What would be the time? T2 is equal to what? 6 hours.
60? No,
66 hours. And look at your answer to 60 hours. Does that make sense? You want to rethink it when you get like these odd numbers. That should tell you maybe you did some wrong calculation. Shouldn't spend 60 hours for this trip. So, because it's only 260 miles total. Okay, so what's the question here? The question here is, how many miles did he drive at the reduced rate? Reduced rate would be this one here. That would be six times, which one? 20? That's a reduced rate. That would be the distance. So now we know 6. Let's use different color. So that would be R2 times T2. That's a reduced rate, and that would be how many miles we traveled. R2 we figured is 6.
120.
And, yeah, T2 would be equal to 20. We already given to us. So how many miles is that? 120? 120 miles. So which one are we going to pick?
Yes.
D?
D.
Very good. D. Question? So distance equal to rate times time for this problem.